In both Ho Swang Huang's poem Floating Sweet Dumpling and Gwen Harwood's In the Park, the authors present ideas around the concept of suffering using a variety of poetic and literary devices. Translated into English by Marilyn Chin, Floating Sweet Dumpling uses a dumpling to explore themes of human oppression, while in the Park, Harwood presents the struggles of a mother taking care of her children. Whilst both Huang and Harwood explore the theme of suffering, Huang mainly uses the personification of a dumpling as well as metaphorical imagery to advocate for resilience against suffering, whereas Harwood conveys that focusing too much on responsibilities leads to suffering. In addition, where Huang uses a flowing style that incorporates enjambment, Harwood uses a more complex sonnet structure, including caesura. Floating Sweet Dumpling is a short poem centralized on the personification of a dumpling. By combining this central image with a range of metaphors, similes, and other descriptors, Huang expresses that she is resilient in the face of suffering. The poem opens with the line, "My body is powdery white and round." Every word in this metaphor is precisely chosen to convey a sense of delicacy and innocence. In particular, the poem uses the words powdery and round because they are non-threatening and harmless, contributing to an overall sense of vulnerability and helplessness. This sentiment is continued in the next line, where Huang introduces the oppression that the character faces. In the simile, the speaker compares himself to a mountain, which is typically a symbol for strength and endurance. Strangely, it is contained within a pond, inviting the reader to wonder how a mountain could possibly be so contained. The oddity of this image signifies the unjust confinement of the speaker. Similarly, the comparison to the act of sinking and bobbing implies that the speaker is trapped by forces they cannot control, indicating the unjust nature of the speaker's oppression. The concept of oppression is continued in the next line, "The hand that needs me is hard and rough," where the poem paints the speaker's oppression as an unyielding external pressure. In terms of the overall metaphor, the kneading hand represents manipulative control over the dumpling that directly shapes and forms its purposes. The choice of hard and rough similarly suggests a painful interaction. Finally, the line, "You can't destroy my true red heart," serves as a final affirmation of strength and resilience. Seemingly directed at their oppressor or oppressors, the speaker directly resists the attempt to destroy or cause them suffering. The use of destroy indicates that while external forces can shape, knead, and confine them, they cannot fully extinguish their spirit. The choice of true red heart symbolizes this, that while they seem a vulnerable dumpling, at their core they are passionate, spirited, and remain just authentically themselves. This is also aided by the poem's overall structure, which uses enjambment, meaning without punctuation, to make the poem seem like a chant. Doing so makes the poem feel more directed and resilient against the suffering that it depicts. Ultimately, Huang's poem uses the personification of a dumpling to ground a series of subtle similes, imagery, and metaphors, strongly articulating a profound message about resilience in the face of oppression. In Harwood's poem In the Park, Harwood tells the story of a woman's identity being impacted by motherhood, presenting the overall message that focusing too much on responsibilities leads to suffering. The poem begins by illustrating a woman's unhappiness as she sits in a park watching her kids. Harwood depicts this situation as disheartening, describing how the children draw aimless patterns in the dirt and how the woman stares blankly at her feet. In addition, Harwood deliberately uses short sentences and caesura to allow the reader to reflect on important sections. For example, in the lines, "Someone she loved once passes by, too late," and "how nice," etc., the pauses emphasize how the woman views the world as sort of stop and start, like discontinuous. This also makes the woman seem very tired and weary, which adds to the poignant atmosphere. As we progress through the poem, we realize that this atmosphere is reflective of the speaker's own identity, that they are lost, disconnected, and have no secure sense of who they are. Her clothes are now out of date, and when she talks to her former lover, she stands rehearsing the children's names and birthdays. She's saying what she's supposed to be saying without actually meaning it. This leads us to the overall message, which is that suffering is due to motherhood. This responsibility, usually idealized in our society, is described in a powerful way. At the end of the poem, the mother confesses to her sadness. "They have eaten me alive," she says, brutally expressing how her identity has been subsumed by motherhood. With this understanding, the woman's actions and thoughts now add more meaning to the overall idea. Despite recognizing her suffering, the woman is still bound to the role of a mother, with no indication that this will change. This is shown by how she still rehearses the names and birthdays of her children, and still falsely expresses her happiness for her situation when she says that she enjoys watching them grow. Ultimately, Harwood presents motherhood as a smothering experience to one's identity, therefore expressing that focusing too much on responsibility leads to suffering. She then goes on to explore our understanding of suffering, describing it as binding, inescapable, and simply merciless.
Both poems depict individuals as products of their environment, and how social norms can lead to feelings of confinement or loss. In Huang's Floating Sweet Dumpling, external forces represent the oppressive weight of social norms that can dictate individuals' lives. Similarly, Harwood's In the Park depicts the burdens of motherhood that can lead to feelings of loss and invisibility. Both poems highlight the emotional toll individuals face because of external pressures. However, both poems vary when addressing the nature of suffering regarding societal expectations. Huang's poem centers on external forces that shape identities, highlighting how oppression can restrict individuals and limit their free will. In contrast, Harwood's In the Park focuses on the internal pressures of women from social norms. Harwood explores the emotional struggle of women as they experience loss through the relentless demand of motherhood. This poem illustrates how societal expectations of women undermine their self-worth and identity. While Huang's poem explores the impact of external constraints on individuals, Harwood explores the internal suffering experienced by women that arises from these external constraints, illustrating the complexities of individuals suffering from societal expectations. A similarity between both poems is their depiction of emotional resilience despite suffering. Huang's Floating Sweet Dumpling illustrates the defiance of individuals against external pressure, representing the struggle to maintain one's identity amidst oppression. Similarly, Harwood's In the Park portrays the commitment of women to motherhood despite them being overwhelmed by responsibility from social norms. Both poems depict the resilience against suffering brought about by external pressure. Furthermore, Huang and Harwood explore different responses to suffering in each of their poems. Huang's Floating Sweet Dumpling focuses on resilience in the face of oppression and suffering, portraying it as a force that empowers one's identity. Conversely, Harwood's In the Park portrays resilience as a more complex and burdensome part of caregiving, highlighting that women demonstrate incredible strength to fulfill their roles, despite the sense of loss and regret they may feel. This contrast between poems shows the different forms resilience can take. While Huang explores resilience as a way to empower oneself, Harwood explores resilience as a form of fulfilling one's role and meeting expectations. In conclusion, both Huang's Floating Sweet Dumpling and Harwood's In the Park each present their unique insights into suffering from external pressure and the resilience that comes from it. Huang explores the impacts of oppression and how it confines individuals. Conversely, Harwood explores the internal suffering of women that arises from these external forces, focusing on the emotional toll that caregiving has on women. These contrasting perspectives illustrate how social expectations can control identities and bring about feelings of loss and confinement. Both poems highlight resilience as either a way to empower identity or a commitment to caregiving, encouraging readers to reflect on the need for change to support autonomy and well-being.